Welcome back. We are diving right into week 11 of our explainer series for the NGO Management Master's Program. And honestly, today's topic is massive. It's totally foundational. Because as future NGO managers, you simply cannot survive, let alone create lasting impact, in isolation. You're going to be operating within this incredibly complex, interconnected web of actors. So today, we're unpacking the real mechanics of partnerships, networks, and that absolutely critical shift toward localization. Here's the roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to navigate state NGO relationships, dig into North-South power dynamics, look at consortiums and networks, talk about capacity strengthening, explore the big push for localization, and finally, we'll wrap up with coordination and exit strategies. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, Navigating State NGO Relationships at the Macro Level. So Helmut Unheier lays out these four models, and they perfectly map how governments and NGOs interact. It really all boils down to whether your goals and means align, right? If you share similar goals and similar means, you're in a cooperative relationship, pretty straightforward. Now, if your goals are similar but your means of getting there are totally different, you're complementary. Think of an NGO running rural health clinics in places where government services just don't reach. But what if the government has dissimilar goals, but they use your similar means to push their own agenda? Well, that's cooperative. And finally, if both your goals and your means are clashing, you've landed yourself in a confrontational relationship. Now, as an international manager, your operating environment is really going to dictate your strategy. Let's look at a few examples. In Malaysia, you might find yourself operating under restrictive security legislation, like SOSMA, where the state heavily prioritizes stability. In that context, rights-based advocacy becomes highly confrontational. But jump over to China, and you'll find a totally unique landscape. There, government-organized NGOs, or gongos, are set up to work right alongside grassroots groups in a much more cooperative, synergistic way. Meanwhile, in India, you'd be navigating this highly fluid continuum. You might hold a public service contract with the government on a Monday, and then find yourself in part opposition over a policy debate by Friday. Remember, our goal here isn't to judge these political environments. It's about understanding the real institutional constraints and the opportunities they present on the ground. Moving right along to Section 2, North-South NGO power dynamics at the meso level. At this level, the power imbalance creates something we call the accountability paradox. It's a tough spot. Local NGOs often face this intense pressure to prioritize upward accountability. Writing endless reports, trying to meet the specific metrics of their foreign donors. And unfortunately, that often comes at the expense of downward accountability to the actual communities they exist to serve. Take a look at Kenya. Data shows that local civil society organizations there get roughly 90% of their operational expenses from abroad. Think about that. That kind of extreme dependency is risky. It can actually delegitimize local groups in the eyes of their own communities, mainly because they're forced to chase foreign funding priorities instead of focusing on immediate local needs. So a really crucial point in development theory here comes down to how we understand power. You've got to ask yourself, is your partnership granting power to the community? Meaning, are you enabling them to gain capacity and literally shift existing decision-making structures? Or are you simply exerting power over them? Are you just forcing them to operate strictly within your existing institutional structures and economic markets? It's a huge distinction. That brings us to Section 3. Consortiums, networks, and alliances. To pool resources, mitigate those power imbalances we just talked about, and really amplify advocacy, NGOs almost never work completely alone. They cluster together. First up, we have consortiums. This is basically an alliance where independent, autonomous agencies share a specific area of interest. They combine their resources to tackle massive, complex issues that they just couldn't handle solo. This is usually managed by one convening agency, but, and this is key, all the members remain entirely independent outside of that specific alliance. Second, we've got joint ventures. Now, in contrast to the broad scope of a consortium, a joint venture is highly specific. It's usually time-limited. Think of it as a strict contractual agreement designed to accomplish one single operational purpose. A classic example would be setting up a shared logistics operation during a rapid crisis response. And third, we have epistemic communities. Now, this is a fascinating concept because it reveals how global influence truly works behind the scenes. These are networks of recognized experts who hold authoritative claims and knowledge in a very specific domain. We're talking about international climate scientists, top-tier public health experts, people like that. NGOs will often tap into or even form these communities to actively promote global norms and literally provide the expertise that shapes government policies. Let's transition to Section 4, Partnership, Due Diligence, and Capacity Strengthening. So, with all those network structures defined, how do we actually go about building equitable partnerships within them? How do we avoid falling into that trap of power over? Well, Alan Fowler gives us what is widely considered the gold standard definition of an NGO partnership. It is absolutely not just a funding transaction. It requires a joint commitment to long-term interaction, shared responsibility for achievement, reciprocal obligation, and, critically, a true mutuality and balance of power. And we're starting to see this put into practice. Take a look at what researchers identify as Agency F. They are a major international NGO that recently shifted its entire policy approach. They basically realized that ad hoc, top-down training was just frustrating and ultimately ineffective. They learned that real capacity strengthening has to be partner-led. The local organization has to actually dictate what training and institutional development they need. They have to completely own and drive the process themselves. Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, Localization and Locally Led Development at the Micro Level. This is arguably the most important shift in modern NGO management. Development practitioner Raif Shweri perfectly encapsulates this concept. He says you can send aid, but development is brewed locally. It's a really stark reminder. You know, those canned packaged solutions designed in a boardroom in Geneva or New York and then just airdropped into a community, they're really only ever going to perpetuate a state of dependency. Just think about what locally led development looks like in real life. Imagine a handicraft self-help group in India where the members themselves are directing their own community meeting. That is the grassroots taking charge. They are the ones mapping out their own economic empowerment. There's no foreign manager running the room or calling the shots. It's their vision, their leadership. To actually achieve that kind of empowerment, as future managers, we've got to completely abandon what we call packaged development solutions. That's the classic, painful mistake of dropping off empty shipping containers or building a beautiful new rural clinic, but having zero local plan for who is actually going to pay the operational costs once the international NGO packs up. Instead, we have to embrace the principle of subsidiarity. This means intentionally relinquishing your authority to local formations. It's about keeping the decision-making process as close to the actual action and the actual people as humanly possible. When you get this right, it creates what's known as the push and pull effect. An international NGO can absolutely push resources, like funding or technical gear. But without a local pull, meaning the locals actively assuming primary responsibility, the project is just going to fail. Look at the Act to Our organization down in Colombia. They got some really crucial funding from Belgian development agencies. That was the push. But the actual pull, the masterminding, the daily grind, the local leadership, that was entirely Colombian. And because of that intense local ownership, they successfully created jobs for hundreds of thousands of micro-entrepreneurs. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Coordination, Complementarity, and Partnership Exit. Let's talk about the ultimate trajectory of all these partnerships. Your goal as an international manager is absolutely not just to swoop in and provide temporary heroic leadership. That's not the job. Your true goal is to nurture a permanent, robust local presence. You're there to help build a community-valued institutional culture, one whose heart will just keep right on beating long after your specific program ends and your INGO is totally gone. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought for your future careers. If your ultimate goal is local sustainability, if true development means the local community genuinely doesn't need you anymore, when exactly do you plan your exit strategy? Something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me for week 11 of this explainer. Keep that exit question in mind as you review your readings this week, and I will see you in the next one.